Thank you to those of you who are here with us. We have, as you know, we have 4 items on the agenda today. We're getting quite late into the session, and we need to make sure that we get time to be able to go through all of those. And so, unlike previous meetings where we allow a little bit more leeway with time, we're going to be a little bit more strict on that to try to make sure that we give each of these bills their chance and a fair hearing. So we may need to, depending on how it runs with these first few, we may need to start limiting fairly quickly to 2-minute increments on the testimony. But we'll go to there, and hopefully we can, with that, make it through. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Representative Draxler's here. I believe he's first on the agenda for HB 136. Oh, we need to do minutes. Everybody have those in front of you? It seems to be Notwell's job, but if someone else would like to do that, then you're welcome. Representative Notwell.
I'm not going to make a comment about your snide remark.
It was with love.
All right, I move that we replace House Bill 136 with first substitute House Bill 136, same title.
Hang on. We need to do minutes.
Oh, I'm
that
sorry.
is your job too, though. That's okay.
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
And Representative Anderegg is going to substitute that motion.
I'd like to substitute that motion, make a motion to approve the minutes.
It's in order. All those in favor of approving the minutes of,
Aye.
What's our date?
Yeah.
February 27th, is that it? Okay. Say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. They are approved. Now, Representative Draxler, would you like him to move the substitute right away? Okay, we'll go straight back to Representative Notwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we replace House Bill 136 with first substitute House Bill 136 of the same title.
Okay. Now we have a motion to replace House Bill 136 with first substitute House Bill 136. All those in any discussion of that? Would you like to speak to that?
I'll waive.
Sponsor the bill. Would you like to speak to that? You
We
need
ready?
the light on. There you go.
Just a change in allocation of revenues, which I can explain when I present the bill.
Okay. And Representative King, did you have a question?
The only thing I wanted to ask is what the difference between the substitute and the original bill is. If it is just a simple allocation of revenues, that's fine. I wanted to know if it was more substantive than that.
Would you like to respond to that?
It does have to do with the allocation of revenues, and again, it would probably be most meaningful to you, to the committee, if I do that as part of the presentation of the bill.
Okay. Sounds good. With that, we'll place the motion. All those in favor of substituting first House Bill 136 with first substitute, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Your substitute, the time is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There are some handouts coming your way. Frankly, it's more handouts than I typically use in a committee discussion, but if I gave you all of the research that my good intern has done, you'd have a book to read. But I appreciate your time this morning. We're discussing an issue that is very critical, and that is alcohol, and specifically overconsumption of alcohol by adult drinkers and underage consumption of alcohol. Now, this bill is a revenue bill in that it raises the tax on beer and it raises the markup on alcohol, spirits, and wine. But my primary purpose in bringing this bill to you is not revenue related. It has to do with the need in our state to curb overconsumption and underage consumption. That's the primary purpose. Nevertheless, and I will explain to you why we're using the tax and the markup to do that, there is a revenue piece. So I'd like to go over the revenue aspect first and then go to the social costs of overconsumption and underage consumption. This has been missing in our debate in the last several years. Our debates regarding alcohol policy for the last several years have centered on economic development, tourism, and accommodation. And those things are valid. But we have not talked very much about the social costs of alcohol. So to the revenue aspects of it, the bill would raise the tax on light beer, that is 3.2% and less alcohol content beer, which is sold at the retail level in Utah, by 4.26%. And it would have that same percentage increase in the markup. In Utah, where we're a state control situation on alcohol, we don't tax wine and spirits. We have a markup at the state liquor stores. It would raise that markup from 86% to 90%. Now, you might say that sounds like a lot. That again is a 4.26% increase. You might say, wow, 90% markup. That sounds like a lot. But in states where liquor sales are privatized, those private liquor stores mark up their product, in many cases, more than that. So in terms of pricing alcohol, it is not an excessive markup. I met with Senator Valentine regarding alcohol policy, and you'll note that he is listed as the Senate sponsor. He was more than eager to be the Senate sponsor of this, because usually when we expand availability of alcohol licenses, there is an accompanying enforcement piece that addresses overconsumption and underage consumption. The bill he's carrying this year initially regarding corporate licenses, or master licenses, if you will, did not have such a piece, and he said, great, let's do it. I know he may have incorporated more into his bill now, but every time we expand the availability of alcohol, if we do, there ought to be a corresponding attention given to enforcement. And so the funds from this tax increase that I'm proposing and markup increase will go to, first of all, the usual percentage will be taken out for the school lunch program. The next thing that will come out will be $62,000 for an additional 1/2 FTE, full-time equivalent, in the Attorney General's office. This is needed because last summer when we went into special session and passed additional restaurant licenses, there was an enforcement piece included. That additional enforcement has resulted in so many cases to prosecute that the one person right now in the Attorney General's office who is assigned to prosecute those cases can't keep up with them. I've been told that there are upwards of 400 pending cases of underage drinkers being served in restaurants that the Attorney General cannot get to. And so the first thing after school lunch that the revenues from my bill will go toward will be an additional 1/2 FTE in the Attorney General's office. Another large portion, which is still being, frankly, we're still working with, would be a significant amount of funds going to the Highway Patrol for DUI enforcement and to the alcohol investigators who actually monitor the sales of alcohol, not only in restaurants, but other violations of the alcohol laws. And so that explains the fiscal aspect of this bill. But more importantly, I want to address the real reason for the bill. last September, there was an alcohol policy summit held in Provo, and experts came from around the country. We had experts from Duke University, Johns Hopkins University, I believe Harvard, and a very prestigious think tank. They have no connection to Utah. They have no connection to the dominant religion in Utah. They simply scientifically study alcohol policy. And the universal message from those people was that Utah should not be moving in the direction of other states with our alcohol policy. That historically we've gotten it right, and that other states should be moving in our direction when it comes to alcohol policy. And so I was intrigued to say, all right, if we want to curb overconsumption and underage consumption, what's the best way to do that? Because the responsible drinkers don't create our social costs. The responsible drinkers don't drive drunk. They don't beat their wives or husbands. They don't get cirrhosis of the liver, and they don't lose time at work. It is the binge drinkers or overconsumption by adult drinkers and the underage drinkers that create our societal costs. As I talked to each of these experts, they said, price. The price of the product will do the most to curb overconsumption and underage consumption. And so you have one handout that talks about the link between price and consumption, which just shows a flow chart that most of us understand in terms of economics, that when the price of a product goes up, typically the consumption will go down. And it simply states that one of the fundamental laws of economics is that quantity demanded of a product is inversely related to its price, the law of demand. Based on economic theory, therefore, increasing the price of alcohol would be expected to lower alcohol consumption. Going deeper, you have a handout that is specific to Utah. It's Appendix A, Total Economic Burden. This is a very careful breakdown of the economic and social costs of alcohol in Utah. And if you'll notice at the bottom, I have written, we're talking billions here, that $1.5 billion is the annual cost, was the annual cost in 2010 of alcohol. And if you include alcohol and drugs, that's $3 billion annual cost to the state of Utah. You've got this handout that shows the profile of a young person. And it's meant to be a little bit over the top because we have a problem. And just because our problem may be lower than surrounding states doesn't mean we don't have a problem. And all you'll need to do is talk to people who've been affected by it to understand this, and I believe you probably have. It talks about beer actually being cheaper than orange juice, and on the back you see a breakdown of that. That we have an estimated 60,000 underage drinkers in Utah. That typically teenagers drink to get drunk. You have very few social drinkers among teenagers. They usually drink to get drunk. And obviously there are serious DUI and other alcohol-related harms. The cost of each household for the cleanup of alcohol abuse in Utah is $3,392. 2 in 5 people, young people in the 12th grade in Utah have consumed alcohol. And for adult overconsumption, the average amount of alcohol drunk is 8 servings. Now, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, defined binge drinking as anything 4 or more drinks in the same drinking occasion for a woman and 5 or more drinks in the same drinking occasion for a man. And typically, our binge drinkers in Utah may be ahead of the national average in terms of the amount they drink, which is 8 servings. Now, you've probably been contacted, committee members, by lobbyists and other folks who may have asked you to predetermine your vote before you came to this committee meeting. And lobbyists, God love them, we need them because they give us information. We need the information from both sides, however. And I'm asking you, if you have come to this meeting with a predetermined vote, that you lay that aside for a moment and consider these social costs. I'm also asking you to have the courage and the political will to vote this bill up or down. Sometimes in our committees, motions are made to move to the next item on the agenda, and no vote is taken. I'm asking you not to do that today. I think our constituents deserve to know where we stand on this issue, and that's why we're called representatives. Further, you have a handout from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention that give the national costs of alcohol. And I'll be brief, Mr. Chairman. I just want to lay this picture out. And this is old data. This isn't the latest data. Well, it's the latest data that we can get. But excessive drinking costs the United States $223.5 billion. That works out to be $1.90 of costs for every drink taken and $746 per person. One of the things that we've heard and focused on with alcohol policy has been economic development. But I want to call your attention to that second to the last paragraph on that CDC handout under workplace productivity, that of the economic costs or of the social costs of alcohol, 72% of those costs are in the form of workplace productivity. People missing work, people being less effective at work, people being even drunk at work. To me, that is a much more significant economic impact than making alcohol more available in restaurants or whatever, or in making sure that our prices, that our tax is more in line with other states, or that our markup is more in line with other states. That loss in workplace productivity is a huge counterbalance to whatever arguments can be made regarding economic development and tourism. Now, you'll hear testimony today from both sides of this issue. I hope you'll listen carefully. I do want to thank those who represent alcohol interests in the state. They've been very civil with me. They have not been threatening. They haven't been nasty. You'll hear them say they don't like the bill. But I want to thank them for their civility. But I also want to thank those who have been personally affected and who work in the area of trying to address the social ills that come from alcohol. You'll hear from them too. And I just ask you to open your minds and hearts and see if you don't think we need to address this issue. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Just like to remind everyone that we're very short on time. So, Representative Briscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Draxler
as a person who doesn't buy beer or alcohol, I don't know what this means. 4%, 3% markup means. So someone who goes in to buy a 6-pack or 12-pack or a single, what does this mean in price?
It means that for someone who's a responsible drinker, it's hardly noticeable. For example, and I don't know those exact prices either, but if a 6-pack of beer costs $5, this is only going to mean about a 20%, or I mean a 20-cent increase. Well, let's see, 4% of $5, yeah. No, that's going to, yeah, about a 20% increase.
Thank you.
Where you see the difference, Representative, is in the large consumer, the person who doesn't buy a can or a 6-pack, but who buys a case. That's going to be more expensive for that individual, and it's going to be more expensive for the group of teenagers that are emptying their pockets out and trying to figure out if they can hire somebody to go in and buy some beer for them.
Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Nielsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me state clearly that I have not communicated with lobbyists. This is based on your presentation. You stated that our underage drinking problem may be lower than surrounding states. How does it compare to surrounding states?
It's lower.
Give us paint a picture.
I have people here who can testify to that.
Is it just a little lower, much lower?
With your permission, Mr. Chair, I could have Richard Nance come up and address that.
Appreciate the opportunity to be here to address this issue this morning. I'm Richard Nance. I'm the director of the Utah County Department of Drug and Alcohol Prevention and Treatment. With me, I have Pat Bird, who's our prevention director. He has the numbers you're asking in his head, so he can answer that question for you, and then we'll talk about some other issues about impacts.
A couple of things to relate to. We have different parts of our states that are higher, or different part of our state that's higher than other areas. Utah County is much different than the rest of the state. Usually we're about half the rates of the state, and our Utah state is about half the rates of the nation, although we have certain parts in our state that are equal or even higher than rates of the nation when it comes to consumption for youth.
So in rank order, we would have, where would we stand in comparison to the other 50 states in alcohol?
Specific to underage consumption?
Yeah, underage consumption.
We're 1 or 2.
One or two in terms of lowest?
Lowest, yes.
All right. How does our tax rate on beer compare to all of our surrounding states?
We're about in the middle of all the states in the country. The lowest is Wyoming. They haven't raised their beer tax since 1935.
I just went online and pulled a report that showed us with the 11th lowest beer tax rate, and every surrounding state is higher.
And if you don't mind, Mr.
Yes.
Vice Chair, the fact that we're lower is wonderful, but to those lives affected, it's still a problem.
Actually, I said that backwards. We're higher. Our rate is higher.
Yes.
And the other states, we're lower on the rankings.
Lower on underage consumption is
but
what I was
we're also
referring.
higher taxed on beer than any of the surrounding states.
And that's, to me, while worth noting, we need to address the problems we have in Utah. And if we have for example, I love the Department of Transportation's approach to highway fatalities. They say 0 fatalities. We won't rest until we don't have any. And while that may be realistic, that should be the approach when it comes to underage drinking in Utah, and that is, we want to keep working on this until it's eliminated.
Well, let me just finish with a couple of comments. I would suggest the way to eliminate underage drinking would be to eliminate the sale of alcohol in the state. That would accomplish the objective, and that's where you would have to go to achieve it, because you're not going to achieve it without simply getting rid of it. Now, as we increase taxes, the question I always ask, and I believe it is, I'm absolutely convinced of this, we cannot raise taxes without affecting the economy. You say, don't consider that. But the question that I want to have answered here, and I don't think you'll be able to answer it, is how many convenience store employees, how many people that provide for their families will lose their jobs because we raise taxes. It's the same thing that has happened and has been demonstrated to happen when the state raised cigarette taxes 3 years ago. How many employees lose their jobs because of that action? We cannot ignore that either. So that's my closing thought.
I agree that
Representative
That was
McKiff.
not a question.
that I can't answer that, but I don't believe that is a significant economic impact. I don't believe that many convenience store employees would lose their jobs with a 4.65% increase.
Representative McKiff.
Thank you, Madam, or Mr. Chair.
Did you just call me Reverend? I'm just.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you.
Wilcox. I'm still just waking up. Your original draft uses 4.65. First substitute uses 3.17. Where are we on those?
Now, the actual increase is 4.65%. Where you're seeing the 3.17%, that's talking about the percent of the revenue and how it's allocated.
All right. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Sagers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Draxler, looking at the handout, Appendix A, total economic burden provided in FY 2010 shows a $3.1 billion impact on our economy. Where did that data come from?
Again, Richard or Pat can address that.
This was from a study done by BYU School of Public Health. It followed the model of a report done in West Virginia in 2007 that was very well received by people and researchers in the field. So they took that methodology and replicated that in Utah. Actually, a lot of the numbers we think are very conservative because when you go to the original sources for the data, sometimes it's very difficult to get the most current data. But that's where those numbers came from. And I can actually give you a more detailed breakdown on what those categories are and what those costs are.
Is this information widely accepted in the academic community?
It was created by the academic community, so yes.
I mean, by other schools outside of BYU.
Well, it's not been published in a peer-reviewed journal.
Don't
That's the
think
question
that wrong.
you're
I went to
asking.
BYU, but
I'm a graduate of BYU among 8 other institutions. And so based on my varied academic experience, I would put their research up against anybody else's.
it was never published or anything, or just it was
No,
just,
it's not been published
just a study
yet, no.
they completed. Thank you.
And Representative, it uses the same methodology as the people from Duke and Harvard and Johns Hopkins.
Representative Andrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I, too, am a little perplexed by the handouts and the information. Not perplexed that I don't understand them, but that I believe that they are grossly overstated, especially when I come back to your CDC handout where it says 72% is the major cause of this portion. You know, if we're looking at $223.5 billion, 72% of that amount is a staggering amount. I'm not suggesting that there isn't workplace productivity loss. But that's a big a portion of this amount that we're talking about. I'm also looking at your total economic burden handout, and we're talking $1.5 billion of proposed true economic burden. And yet I'm looking at your fiscal note, and we're looking at numbers that are drastically less. We're talking about a total of $2.5 million is the total adjusted here. If we're really reaching numbers this high, why wouldn't your fiscal note reflect a more realistic? Mm-hmm. I kind of feel like I'm in sales. I'm in business. And you sell the sizzle. And I get it. And please, I'm not ranting here a little bit, but I am. We're throwing out 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 alcohol bills this session. Mm-hmm. And except for this one, all of the rest are an expansion. I kind of feel like this is, and please don't take this wrong, but I kind of feel like we're in a little bit of a dog and pony show so that we have something to point to saying, hey, we tried to make sure that we were equal on both sides. And yet, the numbers are not adding up for me. I'm looking at this and I'm going, okay, it's likely that this is going to come under stiff resistance because it's a tax, and we're a fairly conservative state. We're going to say, I just don't know, a tax is a tax is a tax is a tax. What your bill is proposing is a net increase of expense of $2.5 million. And the motive behind doing it, I completely agree with. And I want to do away with underage drinking as much as we possibly can. But honestly, I don't see how in the world, from the data you've provided here, that is really going to achieve what you're saying it's going to achieve. I don't know. I kind of feel like we're getting gamed a little bit.
Okay.
On presentation, on just this overall, as far as it being one of the whole package of all the alcohol bills we're looking at.
Was that a question, Representative Andrick?
It was more of a statement.
Okay, Representative Froer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions, if I might, and I apologize. I've been in another committee presenting a bill. So is the intent of this legislation to decrease alcohol consumption in the state, or is it to increase revenue? And if it's to increase revenue, can you give me the justification that we single out a particular group? We're going to call a sin tax. We're going to actually increase taxes on a certain group to pay for social costs that, as the representative just discussed, may or may not be directly related to those people consuming that. And I have a follow-up question after that, if I could.
Yeah.
Thank you, Representative. I started out my presentation by saying my primary purpose is not revenue. My primary purpose is to curb overconsumption in adults and underage consumption. That's my primary purpose. The reason we're approaching it through this method is because it's been proven to be effective. It's been 10 years since the beer tax was raised in Utah. When that happened, there was a measurable decrease in underage consumption. 10 years ago, Senator Waddup sponsored an increase in the beer tax. Underage consumption went down. So that's my goal. The revenue is secondary, actually. We're trying to focus the revenue into prevention and enforcement, but it is not the primary purpose of the bill. And as far as a tax goes, everyone who consumes alcohol will pay that tax, just like everyone who drives the highways pays tax on their fuel. It will affect those who overconsume the most, because that amount is amplified the more you drink. And you know, I'm not sure how you want to characterize it, but the goal is to curb some of these social costs that are real. And in my summation, I'll address the good Representative Andrick's concern about the numbers. But the numbers, you know, they can't get more valid than these numbers.
Representative Froer.
Follow up if I might. So has there been any consideration given to the fact that we have 3 neighboring states fairly close to some major population areas, Washington County, northern Utah, even Salt Lake and Wasatch, fairly close to Wyoming, Idaho, and Nevada, that people have choices that they can, and maybe not legally, but they have choices that they can say, once we're pushed to a price that does not make sense, it makes sense maybe to spend a little extra in fuel tax and drive across into Nevada, Idaho, or Wyoming and purchase these alcoholic products for substantially less. So what we're actually could result in a decrease in revenue, could it not, and possibly an increase in consumption as we force people across the borders, we force people to make other choices. You know, I don't, for one, believe that increasing taxes from the people I've talked to will actually result in a decrease in consumption, but it could very well result in a increase in people going across the borders to purchase these products. So has the sponsor given any thought to that?
Absolutely. And this is already occurring. There's already some some activity of people going to Wyoming and buying. It's a tiny, tiny portion. It is not a significant portion of the total alcohol sales in the state. And so a 4.65% increase, I don't think will dramatically change those who are already going to other states for it. So, yeah, I have given thought to that. And what I think we need to do is decide what our policy in Utah is. Frankly, comparing us to Wyoming is completely unrealistic because they almost don't have a tax on alcohol. I think we need to decide what's best for our state.
Thank you for those comments. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. For the record, those of you that are trying to Google beer statistics, they're apparently filtered, so we're not allowed to get that kind of information from the state web system. So, good luck. Okay. Representative Gibson, did you have a question, or did you experience the same thing? Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor, or Reverend, or Pastor, or whatever. But I guess I'm struggling here because, as you answered the representative from Representative Flora, I don't know where he's from. Anyway, we do that, and I'm like, I got my geography right, but in answering his question, I mean, you were pretty clear that the main reason for this bill is to curb consumption, not just from teens, but adults.
Overconsumption.
Overconsumption. I mean, he drinks one. If I would drink three, it would be over for him, but it's barely touching me. I don't know because of our size difference, so I'll just say consumption versus overconsumption. I struggle as a state to take that approach, that we are the ones going to curb that behavior. I do understand drunk driving, some of the other things that are happening out there, but if the sole reason for this bill is to curb behavior or to change behavior, I'm sure there are other examples out there where laws have been made to do that, but I really struggle doing that. But the real question I have is, how do you come, and maybe you answered this, and I was a little bit late coming today, but tell me, how did you come up with 4.65%? Is there a goal in mind? Why that number? Is there a certain threshold you thought you could get? I'm just curious as to where that came from.
It's a great question. We all struggle with this when we talk about legislating. But my question back to the committee would be, if not us addressing this problem, who? It is addressing behavior, but it is behavior that costs you and me, and sometimes more in human terms than dollar terms. The 4.65%, frankly, Senator Valentine and I sat down, looked at the markup first on wine and spirits. It's currently 86%. We basically said, let's raise it to 90%. It was somewhat arbitrary. It had to be enough that we felt like it could make a difference in consumption, but we didn't want it to be so much that it looked egregious. And so the 4-cent increase in the markup, the 4% from 86 to 90% is an actual increase of 4.65%. And so we applied that same percent to beer. By the way, we did not make heavy beer subject to it because heavy beer is already double hit. They pay the beer tax plus the markup, so we left them alone.
So heavy beer, is that like
that's more
regular, not diet beer?
That's more than 3. It's not light beer, my friend.
Okay.
It's beer that's sold in the state liquor stores above 3.2% alcohol.
Short follow-up.
A few years ago, we had a cigarette tax increase. I did not support that then because I was one of the main reasons for raising the tax, one of the big arguments caught up, was the cost involved in smoking and medical treatment, all the things that came. But yet no one could show me where 100% of that tax generated was going to be dedicated to the treatment of the people who are using it. Where is this money going? Because if it's just going to go to the general fund and we're just going to tax a small portion of people, but yet spend it everywhere else, if you tell me that this is going to go strictly to alcohol treatment and rehab, okay, I can maybe consider that one.
Yeah.
But I don't think you can tell me that.
It's going first the normal percentage by law that goes to school lunch. Next, a fixed amount to go to the Attorney General's office because they're way behind in prosecuting cases of minors being served alcohol in restaurants. And then beyond that to Highway Patrol for DUI enforcement and to alcohol beverage control for alcohol enforcement. We do need more. We do need more for prevention. But that's another issue, but I agree with you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Representative Gibson. Looks like that wraps up our questions from the committee. With that, we'll turn to public comment. Again, we're going to have to... It took dramatically longer. We're not going to get to the other things on the agenda if we keep up the pace. So we're going to have to limit this to 1 minute apiece. Let's raise my hand here when you're getting close, and we'll go from there. So whoever's here for public comment, please raise your hand. Goodness gracious. Okay, let's do that quickly. Go ahead.
Well, I'm already here. Let me go ahead and finish my comments. I had 3 pages of notes, and I want to thank Representative Draxler because he covered about 2 pages of them. What I wanted to talk to you specifically about, and a couple of questions that have come up, is what will be the impacts of increasing alcohol taxes to minimize some of the costs to society and to government that Representative Draxler just talked to you about. I have a report from the Marin Institute, that's a national think tank on alcohol policy that Jordan has that she can pass out to you. And I'm going to highlight a few things from that. Reductions in the numbers of alcohol-related deaths range from 11% to 29%, directly attributable to alcohol tax increases in Alaska in 1983 and 2002. We had 320 alcohol-related deaths in this state in 2010. A 10% increase in alcohol prices would reduce drunk driving by 7.4% among males and 8.1% among females, and reductions of 12.6% and 21.1% among youth. Yes?
That was your warning. You had like 5 seconds left.
Okay. 10% increase in alcohol prices would reduce traffic crashes by 5 to 10%, 7 to 17% among youth. A 10% increase in the beer tax alone would reduce violent behavior among college students by 4%, increase the probability of attending and graduating college 6.3%, and increasing the high school graduation rate by 3%. There are a lot of positives that can come out of this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Did you sign?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, make sure you sign when you come up, please. Thank you.
Name's Pat Bird, Prevention Manager. Let's get beyond intuition here. There's a powerful tendency to assess social science, especially the findings on the basis of prior beliefs, since everyone's an expert. If we are already inclined to believe new research results, then we welcome it in support of our own views. If it contradicts our prior beliefs, then we feel free to dismiss it. CDC did 76 studies on this, independent studies, and what they found out is they will reduce excessive consumption based on price. We have a quarter century of research on this. We're all paying a tab that's too high, drinker and non-drinker. The excessive consumption is causing a lot of harms in our community. C. Everett Koop, Surgeon General, referred to the alcohol excise tax as a user fee. The notion is that heavy drinkers claim a disproportionate share of government expenditures on medical care, long-term care, and criminal justice services. So it seems appropriate that heavy drinkers also contribute more tax revenues than abstainers and light drinkers. Excise taxes on alcohol beverage are the obvious device to accomplish this purpose based on those 76 studies. We need to address the demand side of heavy consumption. We've been addressing the supply side only with enforcement. Let's take a look at preventing these problems because that will reduce the size of our government, the services needed if we're willing to put the time and effort into preventing those things. I want to conclude. We have an opportunity to build a system in our state that is already present, but is only funded by federal dollars. And it is the prevention network across our state to address this. You could use that money to build a system to prevent these problems in the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Boyack.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. At the Connor Boyack Libertas Institute, at the outset of my very brief remarks, I wanted to make a passing observation that I think New York City Mayor Bloomberg would be very proud of the discussion that we're having here. So much focus on the social costs of alcohol, which are readily conceded. No question that there are true social costs involved with the consumption or even overconsumption of alcohol. But Representative Draxler brought up a good point, which is actually the focus of my brief remarks. He asked, if not us addressing the problem, us being the state, the government, then who? That, I think, is the epitome of the question that needs to be addressed. The ownership, regulation, markup, and control of the alcohol system and availability throughout Utah is a glaring violation of the free market. The question before you as a committee is, do you want to increasingly violate that free market, or look for ways with other bills that have been presented before this in other committees that would start to extricate the state and treat more fairly the product that is alcohol and the services that come in relation to it. This bill only focuses on enforcement. The performance note states there will be hiring about 60 to 100 additional enforcement officers, which you can make the police state argument there. But really, I think the most compelling argument here is that of the free market. And this, I believe, takes us in the wrong direction. There are social costs, but I don't think we need to go in a Bloomberg-like direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mortensen.
Ron Mortensen. I just pick up from where Connor left off, possibly. And the question is, where do we stop when we start down this slippery slope? Some other figures that I put in an article I published a while ago, and I think I sent to most of you. Fast food, it's estimated that the cost of that is $147 billion a year to the economy and to the taxpayer through higher medical costs. Falls at home, 65 years and older, it's a $30 billion a year cost to Medicare. Maybe we should restrict them to only taking sponge baths. Soft drinks with sugar in it, $17 billion in medical cost. If we're going to tax tobacco to stop people from using it, if we're going to tax people on beer to stop them from using it, why don't we tax them on soft drinks? How about gun violence? And these figures are all over the place, of course, but they claim it's up to $174 billion a year in work loss, medical care, insurance, criminal justice expense, pain and suffering. There are proposals to tax bullets. So why don't we tax bullets? Why don't we tax everything that's harmful? Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I am Art Brown, the president of MAD here in Utah, and I want to spend my 1 minute in part in memory of JJ and his mother, who received a death certificate instead of a graduation certificate because of alcohol. Deputy Sheriff came to her door and said, look, your son is not coming home, that you sent off this morning. He died in a terrific crash. He'd been in and out of alcohol. And he and his friend got really tanked up on alcohol and went over a cliff and died. Alcohol kills as many teens as any other illegal drug. And I would just like to just turn to a couple of straight facts. We have 62,000 drinkers in Utah. That's BYU Stadium full. 47,000 of them are binge drinkers, and they damage their brains. I'm telling you, this is really a toxic chemical for their brains. It moves them on towards addiction. In this state, we should all realize that there are 12,000, according to the report from the Department of Substance Abuse, 12,000 kids under 18 that need alcohol treatment with resource only for 1,400. That's a delta of at least 10,000. What this bill does is slow down the flow of alcohol to these kids and overconsumption drunk drivers. And because when they get 17, 18, and 19, I'm telling you, price does make a difference. And what I would ask you to do is seriously consider passing this bill out to stop the flow of alcohol, to give people a chance and an opportunity to arrive at the age 21 alcohol-free with a bright range of choices. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Jim Olson, president of the Utah Beer Wholesalers Association. A lot of the points that I had to make have already been made. I've been lobbying on Utah's Capitol Hill for 35 years. I've seen several of these tax increases on alcohol passed, but they've always been sold on the fact that we're going to put that money into treatment, into enforcement. If you look at the fiscal note on this bill, a very small amount is actually going for treatment and enforcement. The vast majority, just like in the past, is going to the general fund. Is that really what you want to do, is put more money into the general fund? They talk about this price increase will reduce underage drinking. I was born and raised in this state. When I was in high school, any high school young person who wanted to get alcohol could do it through legal means. They didn't have to steal it. They didn't have to use fake ID. They went and got family and friends to purchase it. So I don't see how a 4 to 5% increase is going to do anything for these young people who are willing to spend $100 for a pair of jeans or a pair of shoes. We're already one of the very lowest in this country as far as per capita consumption. We're already one of the lowest in underage youth drinking. We're already one of the very lowest as far as DUI.
I need to cut you off right there, but I do have a question. Does anybody in the room know where we are with, since I can't Google it, does anybody know where we are as far as a ranking with per capita consumption?
We are the lowest.
We are the lowest right now.
I know that Tulip County is one of the highest in the state. They also have one of the highest teenage...
Okay, we can't testify from back there, but we are the lowest per capita in the nation consumption right now. Okay.
That is correct.
That's the answer. Thank you. Go ahead, next.
On beer. On beer.
That's what I'm asking, yeah.
Morning, my name is Royce Van Tassel with the Utah Taxpayers Association. This is the first bill, so I'll be very brief. The Taxpayers Association opposes this significant tax increase. Thank you.
Appreciate the short testimony. Thank you.
Royce.
Dave Davis, President of the Utah Retail Merchants, Utah Food Industry Association. I'm going to try to follow Mr. Van Tassel's lead and be very short. We oppose the bill. We appreciate Representative Draxler, as he mentioned. Although we disagree on this, there hasn't been anything disagreeable about it. We are the lowest or second lowest in underage consumption. And let me address, if I can, Representative Nielsen's point about jobs in the state. I don't know what the number is, but are you willing to look into the eyes of someone in Monticello or in St. George or in Bear Lake or in Eden and tell them, look, we're sorry that your hours were cut from full-time to part-time. We're sorry that we no longer can keep you employed at this convenience store any longer because we're losing a large amount of our business across the state, our legal business. We know that you're doing a good job in checking IDs and running and using the systems that we've put in place. And I don't know if you want to have that discussion with those folks out there. So we oppose the bill and feel like our retailers out there are doing an excellent job of preventing underage purchasing of alcohol products.
Thank you. Anyone else? Awesome news. Okay, let's go back to the committee for discussion or action. Representative Gibson. Are you?
Oh, sure. I'll make a motion to pass out House Bill 136 for substitute.
Okay, we have a motion to pass out first substitute House Bill 136. Would you like to speak to that?
We're getting late in the committee process, and rather than hang Representative Draxler out on the vine, make him wait, let's just get on with it. I think most people already decided where they want to be on this, and let's move on.
Go to the sponsor.
Thank you, and I really appreciate your time.
Oh, hang on. I just screwed up. Sorry about that. Representative King. Apologize.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I had a question for the sponsor in light of the testimony from one of the witnesses. I believe someone testified that when you look at the fiscal note, very little of this money, relatively little of this money, is actually going to go to enforcement. Most of it's going to go into the general fund. But help me understand whether that's right or not. I'm looking at the fiscal note right now. There is, in FY 2014, $6.6 million that is put in a restricted fund. Help me understand those restricted funds and dedicated funds and the general fund money.
That is the huge portion of the revenue that would be raised will go to enforcement. That's the amount that will go to highway patrol and liquor enforcement. So the statement that it's all going to the general fund is absolutely incorrect. By far the huge portion of that, of those revenues raised, would go to highway patrol and alcohol enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, the
Millions.
fiscal note shows that it's in the
Right.
that it's a restricted fund. I just wanted you to confirm that. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Briscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted the sponsor to understand that I think the issue of binge drinking and underage drinking is a significant social issue as a high school teacher of 21 years. I think I'm in concurrence with you on your policy goals and happy to work with you on them. Perhaps I'm not sure that this is maybe the best. At this moment, I'm not convinced that this is the best tool to get there. But I am open to learning more about it. Thank you.
Representative Sagers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Years ago, my mother and sister were critically injured in an accident by a drunk driver. They were hit head-on. My mother never fully recovered. As I sit here, I ask myself, would this type of tax make a difference? The answer is no. Will it stop young people from drinking? The answer is no. I know for a fact that in my teenage years, people could go out and buy, and pay someone $5 to go buy them a fifth of whatever they wanted, or a six-pack of beer. I suspect things haven't changed. When I came here, part of my platform was not to raise taxes. And I view this as a tax, and I appreciate the motives behind what you want to do. But in my estimation, this bill is not the best way to address this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Hutchings. Goodness gracious. I heard you say you wanted to make a substitute motion.
You're out up there.
There we go. Hallelujah. I can
Because
push
I
the
want to
button.
respect your request for being quick. Substitute motion that we do move on to the next item on the agenda and just address that quickly.
Okay.
I think the bill's going down. And I know the sponsor asked us to not do that. And I'm going to explain why I think we should do that. There is a problem. And to the members of this body, I think one of the things that we have lost throughout this process, I think it's a national issue, is that actions and consequences are no longer connected. These numbers, I believe, while they are massive, I think they're probably pretty real. You look at the costs and the consequences, and we can have a very long debate on this. I don't think any of us are really challenging the fact that alcohol has a massive effect. Forget all the personal pain and suffering and all that kind of stuff. Just go to dollars alone, to the state, to Medicaid, to all those other kinds of things. There is no question that it has a massive impact. People, it's like the helmet law, in my opinion. I don't want to wear a helmet, but when I crash, I want the state to pay for the rest of my life because I'm now a vegetable that needs to be turned in the sun every 2 hours. But, give me my freedom and my rights and but no responsibilities. There need to be responsibilities. I would like to propose, there's been talk about treatment. I would like to see it redirected to treatment. I'd like to give the sponsor a chance to make that adjustment. I know where we are in the process. I know time is short, but we either give it another shot or we kill it here in about 30 seconds, and I'm proposing we give it another shot. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hey, that's in order. Would anyone like to speak to that? Okay, with that, for real this time, we're going to go to the sponsor of the bill.
Thank you. The substitute motion is well stated, and I appreciate really what the support is being given here. I believe, though, that your constituents deserve to know where you stand on this. I'd like to see a vote. There's no question that there is a direct connection between overconsumption, underage consumption, and societal ills. If you question the 72% aspect of workplace interruption, you'll have to take that up with the CDC, because they are one of the most respected scientific organizations in our country. That number didn't come from me, it came from the CDC. We do all struggle with this. But when situations in society get to be critical, we have a responsibility as policymakers to make the policy. I do not believe, I've heard the retailers say that, on one hand, they say alcohol is a very small part of our business, but boy, they want to hang on to it. And if it's a very small part of their business, I'm not looking that this bill is going to lose people jobs. A quick mention was made of the performance note. When you raise revenue for the state, we not only require a fiscal note, but a performance note. I would encourage you to go on to your computer and read that performance note. It says what would be done with the revenues. We've had a wonderful discussion, and thank you so much for your time, and I respect every one of you for the views you've expressed. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to withdraw my motion.
Okay. That's in order. Motion was withdrawn. Back to the underlying motion. At that moment, I had two different people that wanted to speak still. Do you still want to speak, Representative Frower and whoever was on the left side? No, let's move on. Okay. With that, we'll return to, are you going to continue that? Consider that your sum?
Yes,
for
thank
the
you.
Underlying motion as well. Representative Gibson.
I'll waive.
Okay, it's waived. With that, we'll go ahead and place it. The motion is to pass out, which is the number again? First substitute House Bill 136 with a favorable recommendation. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Nay. Will the ayes please raise your hand? Representative King, Representative Tanner, Representative Gibson. Okay, there you go. Thank you for your time today, Representative Drexler.
Thank you.
The motion failed. Yeah. Okay, well, we are clearly, and Representative Briscoe has offered to bump his agenda item to Monday, if necessary. If we can hammer through it, that'd be great, but that clearly took a lot more time than we had hoped. So with that, we will go ahead and move to the second item on the agenda. Representative King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is HB 98 is a bill that does a couple of things. One is it addresses some issues involving our severance tax. In the state of Utah, we have severance tax that's imposed on natural gas and oil. And it's been in place, our severance tax for the state of Utah has been in place for a long time. Back in the 80s, the industry was really struggling. The oil and natural gas industry was really struggling, and they came to the legislature and they said, we'd appreciate it if you would give us some consideration given the tough economic conditions. And so we set up a dual system, 3% to a certain point in pricing, and then everything beyond that at 5% for severance tax. And the severance tax portion of the Utah code right now has a lot of exemptions and credits in it too that make it sort of, it's not very streamlined, it's not very uniform in how it applies. So this bill eliminates that dual rate structure and imposes a 5% flat rate across the board on severance tax for oil and natural gas. It restricts the scope of exemptions, primarily for stripper wells. Stripper wells are relatively low-producing wells, and back in the 80s, the industry came to us and said, we'd appreciate a little help on the tax rates for stripper wells, these relatively low-producing wells. If you look at line, let me see if I can find it quickly. Line 181 and 182 changes the definition of stripper wells so that it goes it applies, a stripper well means a well that whose average daily production, we changed that from 20 barrels a day down to 10 barrels a day. So we make the application of what is a stripper well more all-encompassing so that we apply the tax to a wider variety of stripper wells. It repeals a number of other credits and exemptions that exist in the code currently relating to such things as developmental wells and work recompletion wells, workover wells. These are all terms, technical terms within the industry, but they're a little patchwork right now in how severance tax works that we eliminate those exemptions. And here's the second thing it does. So it streamlines and modernizes, I think, the severance tax rate structure. But it also deposits the new revenue that the bill generates into the education fund rather than the general fund. Now, with the passage of our constitutional amendment last year that my good friend from Bountiful ran in last year's session, and we got on the ballot and passed in November, there's a certain amount of money that goes into the permanent trust fund. But money that doesn't go into the permanent trust fund will be deposited into the education fund rather than the general fund. So what I'm trying to accomplish with the bill is not just modernize and streamline the structure of our severance tax, but I'm trying to provide more money for education. You're getting some handouts right now that talk about a couple of things. There are two handouts. The first one, if you look at, is I didn't produce a copy of the entire report, but there's a report that if you want to go on the internet, you can find it from Headwaters Economics. There's a report that they have on Utah's oil and natural gas industry. And I just took one page of it, page 11 from that report, because I wanted to have the members of the committee recognize that, as they say in this report, Utah has the lowest effective tax rate of 6 western states for severance tax. Colorado is 4.4 effective tax rate. Montana is a 10.5% effective tax rate. North Dakota is a 10.1% effective tax rate. Wyoming is 11.4% effective tax rate. Utah is down at 3.3%, significantly lower than most of the states around us, and even our next lowest state, Colorado, it's 25% lower than that. So there's room to bring the severance tax rates into parity with our surrounding states. This is a non-renewable resource. Once it's gone, it's gone. One of the things that I like about this idea of increasing the rates and increasing revenue is it's going to go into the education fund in a way that reflects the kind of investment that we want to make in the future of Utah, and correlates nicely to the fact that since we've got this non-renewable resource that's being taken out of the state, that we ought to be taking that money and use it for something that reflects an investment into the future of the state. The other handout that I've provided is a page from the prospectus from Prosperity 2020. You guys, some of you may have seen this prospectus before. It's been handed out at a lot of presentations that the Prosperity 2020 folks have put together. I didn't have enough copies of the original thing, but there's one page that you've been handed that says the plan. And the folks at Prosperity 2020, which of course is the Chamber of Commerce and others within the business community, have identified some revenue options. They recognize how important it is that we have additional revenue for education. The second item under those revenue options talks about modernizing our severance tax system and says that the passage of Constitutional Amendment A presents an ideal opportunity to modernize Utah's severance tax system. The legislature should evaluate and improve the efficiency, equity, and revenue sufficiency of the severance tax, including an examination of the base, rates, deductions, and exemptions. That's what this bill does. It addresses each of those things in a way that reflects the encouragement that we're getting from the business community, Chamber of Commerce, Prosperity 2020, to raise additional revenue for education so that we can meet these aggressive goals that Prosperity 2020 has in place. If you take a look at the fiscal note, you'll see that the amount of money that the bill generates is significant. It's $37 million in fiscal year 2014, and for each year after that, it's $76 million. So we're talking about significant revenue for our education fund. And with that, I've completed my presentation.
Thank you, Representative. We have a couple of questions for you. Representative Andrigg.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to actually support what you're doing here. I love that you're trying to do something that's going to raise funds for education. However, one of the things that I have issue with is of the real taxation. This is a proposed 66% increase of the existing tax. So if we're going from 3% to 5%, that's a 66% increase. Have you looked at, Representative King, have you looked at the impact that would have upon not only extraction but exploration of these mining companies and facilities as they are going out and looking to allocate resources here to the state versus neighboring states who have like resources?
There are individuals within the industry and who really know inside and out severance tax issues that I think can address that, Representative Andrigg. That's a great question, and it's a concern. I'm confident in telling you that the industry will tell you that's a real concern, and that raising the severance tax rates will affect their behavior.
And I just want to add to that I think that not only will it affect their behavior, Utah has some incredible opportunities for mining, if you will, and extraction, but we also have a severe, and I'm going to state this again, a severe drawback when comparison to other states based upon access. Infrastructure we lack. We don't lack the resources. Resources we have an abundance of, but getting to it, if you're a mining operation, you have to weigh those factors. And my fear is, even though I want to increase funding to education, my fear is that your bill and this tax increase would actually have an adverse effect to the amount that is actually extracted, because we only collect the tax when they extract it and sell. We don't collect the tax if they don't extract. And with the current existence of our poor state of our infrastructure, I'm worried that by increasing the tax here, these businesses are going to reallocate even if it's a drawback in a portion, they're going to reallocate to other facilities across the nation where they can turn a greater bang for their buck.
Yeah, I think that there are folks that can address that from both perspectives, both industry folks who echo your concerns and folks who say that's not as big an impact. We don't have to worry about that.
Okay. Thank you, Representative. Representative, some of them have changed now. Representative Nielsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me just state for the record that when I sponsored Amendment A, the amendment did not create justification for increasing taxes. That was not the intent, nor is it the effect. Number two comment. This is a question for the presenter. There was a constitutional amendment some years ago that changed the earmark for the education fund and allowed a portion of that to be spent for other than public education. You recall that? What was the effect of that on public education?
Hurt public education. It ended up taking money from public education.
That
was the constitutional amendment back in the 90s that said that the state constitution which said all income tax would go to public education would be expanded to include uses for both public and higher education. If you and I are talking about the same thing.
Yes, that's the one I'm referring to. And my experience is from speaking to public educators and those that advocate for public education, that was a negative to take that fund and to begin to earmark it for other things than just public education. I find it interesting when I see action in advocacy for publication that now looks to take general fund money that by our current budget is used in the general fund and to now allocate it for public education. Is that not a similar effect we're talking about here?
Well, it may be that effect, but the concern I have is that we as legislators have to make choices about where we allocate our resources. I don't have any question that the will of the people of the state of Utah, and it reflects reality, is that we ought to be addressing the resources, the lack of resources, increasing the resources that we spend for public education. And so you identify correctly, Representative, the fact that the bill will move money that currently goes into the general fund and put it in the education fund.
Right.
I make no apologies for that.
Okay. I find it disconcerting that those that have complained about a so-called or tax voter-approved raid on the education fund to fund higher education, I find in many cases then turning around and saying it's not a problem to raid the general fund in similar terms and put it back in the education fund. Maybe we just ought to go back to that original constitutional amendment and rethink that. But the back and forth between the two funds I don't support. And let me just make one final comment. As we talk about the impact, we've all heard people talk about the tax treatment, the favorable treatment that film companies get when they come to Utah as an inducement to do business here. And I think we all at least have been told that that is an economic development issue, how we're treated tax-wise and what incentives we provide. So I just want to echo the comments that were made previously by the good representative from Utah County, that if we change the incentives, the performance will clearly change. Thank you.
Representative Sagers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Within the last 2 weeks, the Natural Resources Committee, whom I'm vice chair, has been informed and by industry experts that there are significant transportation and processing issues to further expand the oil and gas industry in the Uinta Basin. I can see this tax, rather than keeping the status quo, impacting that resource. You know, I support the premise that we need additional money for public ed. Right now, it's common knowledge, Utah is recognized for our vibrant economy. I think a good part of the reason for that is, we do things the old-fashioned way to generate state revenue. We create jobs by growing our economy, by keeping taxes low, and through that growth, or funding our growth. I'm not aware of any business, including mine, that if I incur a cost, it's not passed on to somebody else. That somebody else is usually the public. I envision that same thing happening here. Thank you.
Representative Hutchings.
Just a couple quick questions, Mr. Chair. In the bill, Representative King, on line 308, and this is something that I'm not real familiar with, but it states in there an exemption prevents the severance tax from being treated as a deduction for federal tax purposes. I'm not familiar with what those areas are. Is there a counterbalancing effect? Do they get to deduct from their federal tax burdens what we charge in a severance tax?
Well, that section, Representative, is talking about the stripper well exemption, and it just basically says stripper wells are exempt unless the exemption prevents the severance tax from being treated as a deduction for federal tax purposes. That's current law.
No, and I'm not debating that. I'm just wondering, because I have no clue. We get to deduct certain things off of income tax. I'm familiar with that piece. Is it similar here that whatever they pay in state severance tax, does a producer get to take that off of their federal burden?
I think that, I can't tell you that I know the answer to that
I'm just
question.
wondering if there's a balancing. So at the end of the day, the total dollars paid, federal and state, is there a balancing effect? Because if there is, then pulling a little bit more into the state kind of seems like a complete no-brainer to me, but I don't know the tax code on that. And
I can't tell you that in drafting the bill I really focused on that. I mean, it's a good question, and I don't know the answer to it.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Representative Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple questions for the sponsor. I commend him on his efforts to think of ways to raise money for public ed, because most people don't know we're not even 50th in the nation. We're 51st.
The District of Columbia is beating us out.
Yeah, it's pretty tough. Let me ask you, this focuses on oil and gas. How do we compare on other natural resources in terms of excise tax? Say, for instance, maybe one of our largest resources, coal.
Why are you making my life miserable, dude? We don't have an excise tax. We don't have a severance tax on coal. This is one of the things that the folks in the natural gas and oil industry said to me when I talked to them about this bill. They said, why are you picking on us, man? Why don't you go down and talk to the people who take coal out of the ground and stick a severance tax on that?
What'd you say?
I said, because I don't want to pick a fight with Carbon and Emery County, that's why.
At least you're honest. One second question, if I may. I don't know how much of this would relate to what the percentage difference between natural gas and oil would be, but those are two commodities that I dare say every citizen in the state of Utah benefits from or utilizes in some way every day. Most businesses, when they get a tax increase, they simply say, kind of shrug their shoulders and say, that's too bad, and they mark up the cost to the end consumer. So one thing I'm concerned about, as we've talked about in prior sessions, lowering the food tax to benefit those that are most vulnerable maybe in society. Could those same individuals, as well as every other citizen constituent, expect to see the price of their natural gas on their heating bill, which my bill this past winter has been pretty high, as well as taxes at the pump go up? That flows through?
I suppose that's possible, Representative. I wouldn't anticipate that it would be much, but I would be not honest with you if I didn't acknowledge the reality that when taxes go up, generally they're passed through to the end consumer. I think that's true. That doesn't trouble me too much. I think that we as a body, a legislative body, are much too cowardly in terms of saying to the citizens of the state of Utah, folks need to step up to the plate and do a better job of funding something as important as education. So the next bill you'll hear from me is even more direct in saying to people who I think have the means to do it, to step up to the plate and pay more money for public education. So the answer to your question in my mind is, yeah, I think there'll probably be some increase in the price that consumers pay for their oil and natural gas. I think it'll be relatively small, but I think it may be there. Some people may come up and testify it's really not going to be there because it'll be spread out over such a broad base. It won't just be Utahns that pay it. It'll be people across the country, and that way it's insignificant. But even if it is significant, I'm not going to pander to this idea that we can't raise taxes to any degree because, heaven forbid, somebody has to pay a little more for something as important as public education.
Just one last comment, if I may.
Go ahead.
I'm friends with a member of the Alaska legislature that I met at a conference I attended, and we got talking about this issue just last November. And he told me, I assume it's true, that the Alaska pipeline is on the verge of shutting down, and once it shuts down, the permit does not authorize them to reopen it, and they have to disassemble it. And he says that since they have raised severance taxes on their oil in particular, that many of those in the production industry have fled the state, and their net revenues now are down dramatically, as well as their exports. And so that's a troubling thing that's happened. I appreciate the information on the relative effective tax rate. That's very insightful. That's one concern I have, though, is that as we tax it, something that's the more mobile it is, the more likely it is to leave our state and go elsewhere. And so, anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Representative. It looks like that's the last question from our committee. With that, we'll turn to public comment. Is there anyone here to speak to this bill? Okay, we're going to have to follow the same rule again. You can keep that to 1 minute. Thank you. And just watch. When my hand goes up like this, that means you're close.
Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Corey Holdaway. I represent the Utah Education Association and 18,000 teachers that are in schools today teaching your children. I am surprisingly in favor of this bill. Tongue in cheek there. And I'm speaking to this in terms of the policy more than anything else. I think if you look at what we've done with regard to the severance tax last year and Representative Nelson's constitutional amendment, I think, as Representative King points out, the timing of this is very good as far as reevaluating where the state is related to severance tax. The issues related to funding education are real. The frustration that educators have is any idea that increases the size of the pie is generally dismissed, and in place the rhetoric is, well, we'll just grow the economy and grow the economy out of that. And there's some legitimate arguments to be made for that. However, when you look at this policy that's been in place, I think it's time to be reevaluated, and this is real money that can be used in a very real way to help us come out of 51st in the country as far as education funding. The good that will come from this will be reduced class sizes, will be improved education as far as students go. I think each one of you, as you campaigned, you are hearing from your constituents. They are supporting increased funding for education. The education community, or the business community, sees the wisdom in investing in education. It's not an expenditure, it's an investment that we're making. And we're going to see, as we dedicate this money to the education fund, it's going to bring back revenue rather than continue to consume. So I would strongly encourage you to support this. I think it's past its time. I think the other thing is, I'll just make a plug in due respect to Carbon and Emory, coal should be reevaluated. So as far as no tax on that, I'm done.
Okay. Thank you, Corey.
Good morning. My name is Mike McKee.
Oh, I'm sorry. He was trying to tell me he had a question for Representative. Sorry. Former Representative Holloway. Go ahead, Jake.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, because I really don't know. Do you know what the recommendation was from the Public Ed Appropriations Committee to the Executive Appropriations Committee as far as did they make recommendations to increase funding?
Yes, they have. In fact, last night, Public Ed Appropriations made a recommendation to Executive Appropriation to increase funding for this year to 2%. Let me just comment.
Wasn't the full
2% on WPU.
Okay.
I want to just caution the members of this committee that 2% with March 1st hitting, sequestration now in effect, that's as if that's going to be neutral. Or maybe a neutral effect. So, we've got to step up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Mike McKee. I'm a county commissioner out in Uena County. Let me just mention real quickly, 66% of the natural gas produced here in the state of Utah comes out of my county. 76% of the oil is produced out of the Uena Basin. Recently, I and a couple other individuals with me were in Denver. We were meeting with one of the executives of one of our larger producers. He indicated that the most difficult state that they do business is in the state of Utah. And so, we need to be very, very very, very cautious as we make these kind of decisions, because we can very much discourage investment into the area. There's a tremendous amount of resource that's out there, has been noted, 111 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, the amount of oil shale and oil sands. It seems to me the way to enhance revenue is we open up our public lands, we open up these opportunities, and you'll have more money for education than you know what to do with. That's the way that we do this, but as we As we cut that back, it does discourage investment. Some of you are aware of the 77 leases that were canceled. I can tell you firsthand that took investment out of our area, sent it to Texas. These decisions are not being made by corporations located in the state of Utah. These decisions are being made in Denver and Houston and other places in the country. And so in these boardrooms, as there's a competition for dollars, they look at the total picture, access, and severance tax, and these taxes are one part of that. But it is an important portion of that. So I would just really encourage the legislature to look at this extremely cautiously, and I would certainly hope that you do not pass that on. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Tanner has a question for you.
Commissioner, you said that it was difficult to do business in Utah. Could you say why?
Well, you know, I was a little surprised about this because I've always thought Colorado was difficult, but I will tell you, they said more difficult than Colorado. Some of this I want to be a little bit careful of because I don't want to be offensive to, I mean, I'd be happy to do that a little bit more privately.
Well, apart from personalities.
You know, part of this has to do with, you know, with the federal issues, with federal lands, as you're aware that in my, in my county, only 15% of the property out there is privately held property. Compare that to Williston, North Dakota, where these companies can go in and get permits immediately, or Texas or Colorado. So that's part of it. There's air quality issues. There's a number of issues when you put that all on the table, and then policy, just certain policies. And so these items become cumulative. And you know, as was noted even with coal, and I'm not here advocating severance tax on coal, but I think the legislature wisely said, to be competitive with coal, let's stay away from severance tax on coal. I think we need to also be very cautious when we start, you know, tinkering with formulas, because that makes a difference in investment decisions these companies made. And there is true competition out there as to where these investment dollars go. It is going on as we speak.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's move to the next witness.
My name is Gabriel Lozada. I'm a professor of economics at the University of Utah. And about 5 years ago, I did a pretty extensive study with a PhD student of mine on oil and gas taxation in Utah. And I just want to emphasize that this is an increase for oil, an increase from 3% to 5% only on the first $13 per barrel. If the price of oil is higher than $13, and now it's about $93, all of that is already taxed at 5%. So it's not a 2% increase on the whole price, just on the first $13, which means it's an effective tax increase on oil about 26 cents per barrel, 26 cents compared to $93. For natural gas, it's increasing from 3% to 5% only in the first $1.50 per thousand cubic feet, not on the whole $4.72, which is the current price. And so you're talking about an effective price change of 3 cents per thousand cubic feet, 3 cents of $4.72. So this is a really tiny tax increase. I ran the numbers on what the negative economic effect of this would be, because anytime you increase the tax on an industry, it's going to have a negative economic effect. The decrease in number of oil wells drilled per year in Utah would be a decrease of about 0.3%. That's not 3%, that's 0.3%. The decrease in gas wells will be 0.5%. So there is a decrease in economic activity. Of course, there's a corresponding increase in economic activity because the state spends the money that it gets. But these are really small because we're talking about really small tax increases.
Okay, we have some questions for Representative Nielsen.
Yes, thank you. I believe you testified before this committee a couple of years ago on an earlier proposal. At the time, I wondered a couple of things. I recently finished reading the book. I was late getting to it, Freakonomics, and he pointed out that economics is all about incentives. People respond to incentives. Is that correct? Sure. I guess my basic question is, you ran the numbers based on a model. Was this a model that's accepted industry-wide by both consumers and producers and environmental advocates and all players, or is this something you came up with on your own?
This is something that my graduate student and I came up with on our own because we wanted to use only Utah data. It's the full report, including all the equations, all the data, all the estimation technique was produced on behalf of the legislature, and so it's all public.
Do you think that if the extraction industry hired an economist to create a similar model, that the results would be the same?
Yes.
Really? You think that if you put 2 or 5 or 10 economists in a room, all the results would be identical?
It is certainly possible to construct an economic model to get the answer that you want.
Yes, that's my point.
But if I were in a debate with another economist, I think I could defend this as not being a model that was trying to get the answer that I wanted. I wasn't really sure what answer I wanted to get, but a very realistic model.
But nevertheless, you'll concede that the best economic model or any kind of a mathematic model is based on a great number of assumptions about behavior, about incentives, about the way people perform under circumstances that cannot be foreseen.
So what we did with this model was use many decades of data on the oil and gas industry in Utah to correlate how changes in the price of those commodities affected the drilling rates in
Fair
the
enough.
state.
But the tax rates have not changed all that much, as was pointed out, in many, many years. So it's another factor. So I just want to point out that it's one perspective, and I think that there are many others. But thank you.
Thank you, Representative. We have several other questions for you. Representative Briscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I received a publication that I think is mailed to every legislator, something West. They do something unique in this monthly publication, which I think should be done more often. In the back of the magazine, they publish each article, and they tell you if any of the people who wrote the article or did research for the article, if they received any funding. So I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Gabriel Lozada.
Did you receive funding from any outside organization other than your salary as a University of Utah professor to do the research you did?
To do the main research that I did with the graduate student, I received funding from the legislature.
From the Utah State Legislature?
From the Utah State Legislature.
Did you receive funding from any other group?
No, and never have.
You're an economics professor?
Yes, that's right.
Does the economics department receive grants from any natural resource producers?
No.
Thank you.
No.
Thank you, Representative Briscoe. Representative Tanner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is whether or not producing oil in Utah has unusual expenses. Is there something harder about getting oil and making a profit in Utah than there is in other states?
There is, but if it were a lot harder, it wouldn't be done. The industry certainly makes a profit on its activities in Utah and has made a profit in many other decades when the price has been much lower than it is right now.
Is there any brief way of saying what the differences are between Utah and other places?
Well, Utah has higher extraction costs. I'm not sure about natural gas, but for oil, it's a type of oil that's harder to process.
Okay. But you took that into account in your modeling.
That's why we wanted to use only Utah data for the response. So this is the response of Utah oil and gas developers to changes in the price.
Thank you.
And one more for you, Representative Andrei.
I will be quick. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did your data, when you were looking at this, you said you looked at the historical data of oil and gas mining. Did your data take into account maybe a weighted measurement of that data based upon the wild animals of politics with oil and gas production through that time frame? For instance, I would imagine that oil and gas production was different under Ronald Reagan than it would have been possibly under Jimmy Carter, given the economic factors there. I would imagine that under George W. Bush, it'd be different under Bill Clinton, and likewise today. Did your data look at any sort of weighted measurement there, or was it just a rote, this is the historical information, we're just going with this without actually taking into into account the external outlying influencers?
We only took the price of the commodities into account. So to the effect that those actually U.S. government decisions don't really affect the price of oil much, but they could affect the price of natural gas quite a bit. To the extent that those government policies affected things via the price, we capture that. To the extent that those government policies affect the oil and gas industry in other ways that don't have anything to do with price, that's not captured in the model. This was just a question of how do price changes affect behavior, and that seems to be relevant to the issue at hand because we're talking about a tax increase, which is like a price change.
Some of the data that you presented, though, was the adverse effect it would have as far as the number of oils, the whatever they call them, their oil drills or whatever,
right.
How many would decrease.
Right.
But does that take into account the Department of Interior's actions on restricting permitting?
No.
Okay.
No.
Thank you.
Okay. Representative Gibson? No? Very quickly, you have one or no? Okay. Very quickly, thank you very much, and we had several questions for you, and we don't very often get people who are clearly so excited and happy to be doing what they're doing. So I don't know how to say that, but you clearly have fun with economics, and it's fun to watch you, so thank you. I'm glad you're teaching that. Okay. Peacock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Lee Peacock. I'm president of the Utah Petroleum Association. It won't surprise you that I'm speaking strongly today in opposition to House Bill 98. Much has been said on the issue. I have a ton of comments, but I know that I have more comments than you have time, so I'll just say this. The state's oil and gas severance tax policy has been carefully crafted over the last 30 years to be fair to both the state and to the taxpayers, and designed in a way that will allow our industry to be competitive in the state of Utah based on the various impediments that have already been discussed to our being competitive with other states where companies can invest their capital. To Representative Andrigg's comment earlier, most oil and gas producers work on a cash flow basis. They compete within their company for the capital allocations for their Utah operations. When costs, including taxes, go up, there's less capital available to drill wells. Higher costs equal fewer wells and less production, which has extremely significant detrimental impact to the state, to local communities, to the high-paying jobs that our industry creates. Many of you may or may not know our industry is the largest contributor to the Permanent School Fund through production on school trust lands. We are a major employer in the state, offering significantly higher wages than the state average. I'll wrap up by saying this. We do strongly support public education in the state of Utah. We depend on it as an industry. We'd be happy to continue this discussion in a broad-based approach on how to help fund these critical needs in the state of Utah, but we strongly oppose this bill and hope that you'll not advance it. Thank you.
Peacock, we've got 3 questions for you. Representative McKiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question relates to the very comments which you make, and it is, have we reached Aristotle's golden mean with our rates? Suppose the suggested increase were half, from 3 to 4 instead of 3 to 5. Respond to that, if you will.
The one point with Dr. Lozada's presentation that I think we would have some disagreement is that costs do make a difference in a company's allocation of resources into Utah versus other places. So to answer your question, any increase in costs would have some impact. Obviously, the particular bill we're talking about completely guts the state's severance tax policy. More minor modifications would have less of an impact, but still would have some impact.
One follow-up question. is your industry willing to come to the table to talk about anything other than the status quo?
The answer is yes. We're always willing to talk. Talking under this scenario where there's such a huge tax increase is difficult, but we would be willing to have all the conversations necessary to do our part in helping the state be successful.
Okay, Representative Tanner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Peacock, I was wondering if you could help me with something here. I'm trying to get my sense of proportion. The fiscal note on this indicates that it would probably increase the taxes in the industry by about maybe $76 million. Right? And the handout that we got is telling us that on an annual basis, the industry is having production value of $3,851,000,000, which seems like a pretty healthy amount of money. Why is that $76 million going to swing a lot of weight?
In addition to the severance tax, we also pay a number of other taxes in the state. Really what you're talking about in allocation of resources is how we compare relatively to other places where the companies could invest their capital. So if they can make more money in Wyoming or Texas or Oklahoma or overseas versus putting that capital here, that's what they're going to do, because that's what we're a for-profit industry. To specifically answer your question, severance tax isn't the only factor in those allocation discussions, but it is a significant factor. So not everyone's going to pick up and leave the state based on a $76 million tax increase, but over time it will have a dampening effect on companies' outlook on Utah compared to other places where they could put their resources.
Thank you.
Okay, Representative Cosgrove.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try to be quick. I know I'm not going to understand oil, gas, coal industry in the few minutes that we have here, like the good representatives before me, trying to understand the economic models that we're trying to use and the analysis behind this as well. But help me to understand the cap or the line where we set for what type of wells, whether it's a stripper well or what type of well, where the industry is trying to extract that to identify the resource within the ground, and then the propensity to make it a working well or a profit. Where does that line meet? So if I can extract 50 barrels out of the ground, and then I know I'm going to get a gusher, or if I'm going to extract 50 gallons because that's the cap, 50 barrels, that's the cap, and then I go up and set up another well and extract another 50 barrels and another well and another 50 barrels. Where's that balanced line?
I hope I'm answering the question that you're asking. I think you're specifically referring to the stripper well exemption. I get embarrassed saying that word in front of the legislature.
I'll cover it.
The stripper well exemption is designed to keep low-producing wells in operation as long as possible. Once a well becomes uneconomic to produce, a company will shut it in. Unfortunately, or fortunately, we have thousands of stripper wells in the state of Utah, low-producing wells that would have a serious impact on our oil and gas production if they became uneconomic and therefore were shut in. So the targeted exemption for stripper wells is to keep those wells economic for a longer period of time, because as soon as it costs more to get it out of the ground and to maintain it, the sooner it's going to be shut in. So that targeted exemption is to help extend the economic life of thousands of wells in the state of Utah.
Okay, I'm just trying to identify that balance where the resource I consider a state resource, a future resource for not just our generation, but for many generations to come. and the value for the good industry that we're trying to provide with resource and jobs. And so I think there's a measure there.
And if you understand the economic life of a well, most wells, when they're initially produced, produce this amount. But the decline curve is rapid in most oil and gas wells. So they'll produce, 50, 60, 70% of their production in the first year or two of production. And then they level off and they maintain a much lower level of production potentially for years and years and years. So we're trying to keep those wells alive.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I recognize it's not a perpetual resource, but I think we're trying to strike a fine balance there.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead. Thank you, Mr. Pecan.
My name is Irene Hansen. I do economic development in Duchesne County, the #1 oil producer in the state of Utah. Just a couple of things that I would just like to highlight. Again, 76% of all of the oil is coming out of the Uinta Basin. On most of that oil, we take meaning the industry and those that are producing oil, take about a $15 per barrel cut at the refinery because our oil is a solid. It's heated to come out of the ground. We have about 2.5, 3.5 hours at the most to get it to a refinery before it sets up like a candle. And so we do take, again, a $15 a barrel haircut on that price right off the top just to have it refined. The other thing keep in mind is on any production that takes place on tribal land, they also have a severance tax. And so in those cases, the companies are paying double. In addition, in this bill, Anadarko in particular, one of the reasons why, if you were to look at the natural gas production in Uinta County, even though the price has gone way, way down, Anadarko has invested hundreds of millions of dollars on a cryogenics plant where they do take off the liquids. And right now in the bill it would raise that tax from 4 to 5% across the board. So we would ask you to vote no on the severance tax increase. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Again, my name is Royce Van Tassel, Junior Woodchuck with the Utah Taxpayers Association. I'm going to raise a slightly different point than you've heard so far, and that is there is a received wisdom. We've been told that by providing an additional $76 million, class sizes will go down, that educational achievement will increase. And frankly, the research simply doesn't bear that out. The only research that talks about or the only meaningful research, the best research that's been done in Kansas City about class size reduction says that if you get class size down to somewhere in the 15 to 17 range, you will have a marginal increase in student achievement. Nothing about $76 million a year comes close to reducing class sizes anywhere near that. Second, there is substantial agreement that real per-student spending across the country and in the state since 1970 has doubled, yet student achievement has been flat. And so to think that raising taxes, whether it's through this process or what Representative King has with his proposed income tax increase, will actually change student outcomes is perhaps overly optimistic. For those reasons, we would encourage you to oppose this significant tax increase.
Thank you. Go ahead. And just quickly remind everyone it's 9:56. We'd like to have a vote on the bill.
Ann O'Connell, speaking for the League of Women Voters of Utah. Believe it or not, the League has a position on severance tax, and we believe that they should be raised, which this bill does in a very modest fashion. We also had very high expectations of this legislature, as does the general public, that you would make a very serious effort to increase funding for education. This bill does that also. So we support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman,
I'm
my
sorry.
name...
There may be a question.
Oh,
Representative McKiff, did you have a question for the witness? Okay. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Bobby Ralston. I'm with Anadarko Petroleum Corporation. Anadarko is one of the largest, if not the largest, taxpayer and natural gas producer in the state. And just to sort of build on what has been said before, every project that we have in our portfolio has to compete against the other projects. Now, we have two very distinct projects here in the state. We have the Uinta Basin, where it was mentioned earlier that they produce natural gas that has natural gas liquids in the gas. We did indeed spend several $100 million building a cryogenic gas plant up there to help extract those liquids, which helps that gas become more competitive with other projects throughout the country and throughout the world. We also have another project in the state down in the Price area that is a coal bed methane project. There are no liquids. That project receives the minimum gas price last year, somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 an MCF, sometimes well below that. When we went through our capital budgeting for year 2013, for 2012, we gave no money to the Price area because it was not competitive with anything that we produced throughout the country. Although we maintained a relatively moderate activity up in the Uinta Basin, for 2013, we are going to cut our rig count by 50%. Mr. Chairman?
We need to wrap up. We're not going to make it on the floor. I apologize.
Okay.
We need to.
We would ask you to oppose this bill, and I'll let the next person.
Thank you very much. Quickly.
Okay, Chairman, Ryan Wilcox. My name is Ryan Plune. I'm a former high school science teacher that has left the education profession because our class sizes are too high. I'm here to speak in support of this bill for any help that it gives our public education funding. I also did not hear mention of the carbon bubble that exists on the global financial market, and we can talk about Utah economics and growth all we can, but these extraction industries are run by a global market, and the carbon bubble is that all nations have agreed to a 2 degrees Celsius rise. In order to achieve that goal, we can only burn 565 gigatons of carbon between now and 2050, and the oil and gas industry has 5 times that amount in proven fossil fuel reserves. So at some point there's going to be a crossroads, and these assets will become toxic.
Okay. We're at the point where we're going to have to take action right now, or we won't be able to take action at all. Representative King, do you want to keep public testimony, or do you want to move back to the committee?
Why don't we go back to the committee? I'd like to know what the sense of the members of the committee is.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, without return back to the committee for action, we have Representative McKiff. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that we hold the item. I'd like to speak to that.
Okay.
The education needs are clear. The industry's ability to help is not clear, but at least the good representatives from the industry said we're willing to talk. No harm in the talking. If the talking produces anything, it could resurface. Otherwise, this will be the end. That's my motion and the reason for it.
Hey, we have a motion to hold the bill. Representative Hutchings.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've had a lot of people talk. I had some things I really wanted to express on this. I think there's still more to be done. Holding, that means coming back, not coming back. Still
Good.
with the chair, going back
We
to
have 2
rules.
meetings left, guys. So this is, and we just pushed off 2 more. So, yeah, hopefully. Representative Cosgrove.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just substitute motion.
Substitute motions in order?
Put it on the top of the item for our next Rev Tax meeting.
Okay. Is that a real motion? Okay, we have a motion to hold it for the next committee hearing. Would you like to speak to that?
Just put it on top of the agenda. Thank you.
Would you like to speak to that?
I think that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. Thank
Representative Hutchings.
I would support that. There's work to be done here.
Okay, that's in order. With that, we'll place that motion, and all those placing whatever the bill number is at the top of the next committee meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Okay, looking for one final motion. Motion to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. We're adjourned.